While doing research for another video, I noticed that there are 10 one-way intermission routes in Mario Kart World. So the routes that you can play when you're going from track A to track B, but not from B to A. But like, why? Isn't part of the point of these sections to add variety to the track pool? Why not add 10 extra tracks by investing almost no development resources to make these 10 routes go both ways? I mean, it sounds so simple, and yet they didn't do it. So maybe there's a reason that they couldn't. So I tried out each of these 10 routes to get to the bottom of this question, and what I discovered was actually kind of shocking. The search for this answer led me to find rushed level designs, a critical flaw in the layout of the world itself, and a conspiracy to hide a track that Nintendo seems to be ashamed of. So, welcome to the video, I'm SeaMcCraft, and today let's explain every one-way intermission route in Mario Kart World. So just to start from base principles here, in Mario Kart World you have standard tracks and the roads and waterways that connect them in the open world. Those connecting routes can be played as part of a race when you select a race that travels from one track to another. They also make up the bulk of races available to select in standard online multiplayer lobbies. These are called intermissions or routes, depending on who you ask. Nearly all of them can be raced in both directions. However, there are 10 that can only be raced one way. We're trying to figure out why that is the case for each of them. So, let's go down the list and see what we can find. Our first intermission route is the most well-known of these one-way routes, Peach Stadium to Rainbow Road. It's the final race of the Grand Prix mode, but there is no such thing as Rainbow Road to Peach Stadium. In addition to being the most well-known of these, it's also the most obvious as to why it's one way. Just look at the fact that Rainbow Road has 0 connections from it to another track, and it only has one connection going to it, being the connection from Peach Stadium. A connection it was basically forced to have to fit in with how this game handles Grand Prix mode. That's because in Grand Prix mode, each track you race on is connected to the previous track you just raced on. So, if you wanted to have Rainbow Road be the final track of the Special Cup, which it basically always is in Mario Kart, it had to have at least one connection to it from another track. You add on top of that the fact that, objectively speaking, this is a pretty lame intermission segment anyway. I mean, sure, it sets the ambiance quite nicely for the final race of the Grand Prix mode, but ascending to Rainbow Road is obviously better for that purpose than descending from it. In terms of actual gameplay, this little segment has very little going for it. This segment is actually raceable going the other direction when you're racing to Peach Stadium from Koopa Troopa Beach, and it's really nothing special there either. Though this jump into the stadium is admittedly pretty cool, but that's really all it has going for it. And the cherry on top is that since no intermission routes start at Rainbow Road, reversing this route actually probably wouldn't be trivial in terms of development resources, since I'd have to set up a whole sequence of leaving Rainbow Road. So, given that they weren't interested in making any routes start at Rainbow Road, it would have required a fair amount of effort to implement. And the ultimate payoff would be kinda lackluster, so it's no surprise that Peach Stadium to Rainbow Road is a one-way route. And actually, our next one-way intermission route is also in the Special Cup. Mario Circuit to Peach Stadium is actually the race right before our previous route, but you cannot race from Peach Stadium directly to Mario Circuit. And there's one pretty clear reason why. Yeah, so Moo Moo Meadows is directly in the path of this route. And this route doesn't even go around it, it just goes straight through. In fact, this route is literally just Mario Circuit to Moo Moo Meadows and Moo Moo Meadows to Peach Circuit stapled together. So basically this route shouldn't even exist. It cuts right through another track on its way to its destination, and it isn't even a unique route. Maybe if Mario Circuit were desperate for tracks to connect to, I could see the justification, but that simply isn't the case. The track already had 8 connections before including a connection to Peach Stadium. So why does this exist? Well, to put it simply, Nintendo painted themselves into a corner. I don't know when exactly they decided in development that they wanted Acorn Heights, Mario Circuit, Peach Stadium, and Rainbow Road in the Special Cup. But if they decided on that after the world layout was pretty well set in stone, Mario Circuit and Peach Stadium aren't adjacent to each other. I guess they could have scrapped Acorn Heights in favor of Moo Moo Meadows, which actually does sort of explain why the Acorn Heights to Mario Circuit connection is so weird, in that you play all 3 laps of Mario Circuit instead of just 1. Maybe Mario Circuit was initially meant to be the start of the Special Cup, like how Peach Beach is in its cup. That way it would naturally be a 3-lap track. But ultimately you can't put Moo Moo Meadows, originally a Mushroom Cup track, in the Special Cup. It'd be a farce. No. That is what the Lightning Cup is for. So why isn't this route 2 ways? Because quite frankly, it shouldn't even be one way. The only reason this route exists at all is because it had to for the Special Cup to work. Next up, we're visiting Skyhigh Sunday, which has 2 one-way routes starting from it. Skyhigh Sunday to Cheep Cheep Falls, and Skyhigh Sunday to Salty Salty Speedway. And honestly, they both start off criminally. This exit from Skyhigh Sunday drops you off right at Vanilla Lake, and both of these routes barely use that track at all. Huge missed opportunity. From there, this snowy canyon is visually pleasing and one of the more interesting sections of road in the world to drive on. And after that, the roads to the tracks themselves are perfectly serviceable, with much of them being used in other routes or knockout tours even. So why are they only one way? I mean, sure, there's a little bit of missed potential here, but there's nothing wrong with these routes. Well, have you ever noticed how odd Wario Shipyard to Skyhigh Sunday is? Like, I mean, look at this route. Why the heck is there a massive U-turn at the end? Or put more simply, why does the route from Wario Shipyard approach Skyhigh Sunday from the north? This becomes even stranger when you compare the map of Wario Shipyard to Skyhigh Sunday to Skyhigh Sunday to Wario Shipyard. They're completely different routes. But why? Why go through all that trouble when you could have done what 90% of the routes do and just had the same route going both ways? Well, I think it's because Nintendo only designed one entrance to Skyhigh Sunday. Every single route to it takes the northern entrance, even ones where it doesn't really make geographic sense, like from Wario Shipyard. As for why this is the case, I'm not quite sure. If you explore in free roam mode, you find a perfectly fine approach from the south, the same route that Skyhigh Sunday takes to Wario Shipyard, Cheep Cheep Falls, and Salty Salty Speedway. It even features a beautiful transition onto the track proper, but it's completely unused as an entry point. Maybe they had some sort of issue setting up the barriers and like for the race here? Or maybe they didn't like that approaching from this entrance would make you effectively do a lap into half of the track, though they're perfectly fine with that elsewhere. In any case, why are these two routes one way? Because Nintendo never bothered to make the southern entrance to Skyhigh Sunday actually usable as a racing entrance. And they were apparently so adamant about that they routed Wario Shipyard's route around to the north. And I guess when it came to Salty Salty Speedway and Cheep Cheep Falls, since these were both already long routes to tracks that have a fair number of connections already, they just decided to cut the return routes altogether. Now, how about a track that instead of having multiple one-way routes coming from it, has multiple one-way routes going to it? Koopa Troopa Beach is the destination for one-way routes from Great Question Mark Block Ruins, Desert Hills, and Whistle Stop Summit. Now, in terms of the quality of these routes, I'd give them, I don't know, a 7.8 or so. There's simply too much water. Now, I actually like water driving in this game. I find that having to trick off the waves proves to be a fun, dynamic challenge, but a lot of people really hate these Koopa Troopa Beach routes that are comprised half or more of just driving straight across the ocean. And fair enough. And as for these three routes, yeah, they count as more of that. Now, of these routes, Great Question Mark Block Ruins is probably the most understandable. The southeast of the map is just really sparse, and because of that, Great Question Mark Block Ruins only really has 4 tracks that it's truly adjacent to. So, Great Question Mark Block Ruins needed this connection to pad things out, but from the Koopa Troopa Beach perspective, it was not nearly as desperate to add one of the longest intermissions that also happened to have a massive ocean section to it. Whistle Stop Summit also makes a good deal of sense. Koopa Troopa Beach is only its 6th connection, and truly the 6th closest track to it. But that doesn't explain why the connection's not mutual. Whistle Stop Summit would also be Koopa Troopa Beach's 6th connection, and the fact that this canyon river is a big part of the route makes it kinda interesting. Unfortunately, that section starts with this jump. Yeah, that'd be pretty hard to do the other way. I mean, I guess technically you could put up some scaffolding, or take the river all the way to the track and climb up this coal pile or something, but in any case, you'd have to rework some stuff, and are you really going to do that for yet another long ocean-based route? But then there's Desert Hills, and I mean, what is going on here? I have no idea why this route exists. It's one of the longest routes in the game, and it's connecting to by far the shortest track in the game. So it has probably the worst intermission to actual track ratio in the entire game. And actually, come to think of it, that does make this whole situation with 3 one-way intermissions terminating at Koopa Troopa Beach kinda frustrating. I mean, a single lap on Koopa Troopa Beach is so insubstantial, it's arguably the worst possible way to end an intermission track. Like, it's either that or Desert Hills, honestly. I mean, you can finish the race while people are still not even on the actual track yet. It's that short. But anyways, back to this connection. Due to its length, it's just such a ridiculous connection that I think the real question isn't why Koopa Troopa Beach doesn't reciprocate, but rather why Desert Hills has this connection in the first place. I mean, I get that it's on the edge, so it doesn't have that many connections. But there were much better candidates than Koopa Troopa Beach to connect to. Wario Stadium is about as close and probably could have been a more interesting route and certainly a more interesting destination. And DK Spaceport is definitively closer and again, would have been a much better end track. And you can't even make the argument that Koopa Troopa Beach needed the connection, because it's not even reciprocal, and it already had 7 tracks going to it anyway. Now you may be thinking, okay, well, maybe it's the jump into the river again. Well, no, this is the jump into the river. That is perfectly reversible. So honestly, I have no idea why this route exists. I have no idea why it's a one-way track. I guess maybe it's one way because they found out it was lame after they already built it, but in that case, why did they build it in the first place and not just go to a different track? It's baffling. So that's 7 explained, or well, more like 6 explained and 1 gawked at. But what of the other 3? Well, they all start at the same track, DK Spaceport. The one-way routes in question are DK Spaceport to Mario Bros. Circuit, DK Spaceport to Peach Stadium, and DK Spaceport to Desert Hills. Of these, DK Spaceport to Peach Stadium is the most obvious as to why it's one way. Once again, we have a track on the edge of the map, desperate for connections, and a track in the middle that already has 8 connections anyway. Add on top of that the fact that DK Spaceport to Peach Stadium is just DK Spaceport to Koopa Troopa Beach, and Koopa Troopa Beach to Peach Stadium stapled together, albeit with different water obstacles, and it makes perfect sense as to why this is a one-way route. DK Spaceport to Mario Bros. Circuit is a little more puzzling. It's a perfectly fine track that isn't too derivative of anything else, and DK Spaceport is about as close to Mario Bros. Circuit as Toad's Factory, which it does have a mutual connection with. The only real issue is this plane ramp that takes you into the river, which would obviously be difficult to do in reverse, but would it actually be all that difficult? I mean, couldn't you just put a plane ramp in the river for the return trip? Maybe it wouldn't be that simple. I guess in any case, Mario Bros. Circuit already had a lot of connections, so it really didn't need the mutual, but again, I feel like you could have had it. And then there's DK Spaceport to Desert Hills, which... wait a minute. Desert Hills. The same Desert Hills that was so desperate for a connection, it has one of the longest ones in the game, and to Koopa Troopa Beach of all places. It already had a connection to DK Spaceport that it neglected to make 2 ways? Why? I mean, sure, this route does have a jump into the canyon, but coming up with a way around that surely would have been easier than making a whole new route from scratch. I mean, again, seriously, we're talking about probably literally just putting a plane ramp in. Or failing that, just like a normal ramp. That would work too. Either of those options should have been way easier than building an entire new route all the way to Koopa Troopa Beach, which, let me remind you, is one of the longest routes in the game, and it's not even very good. What's crazy is that half of DK Spaceport's connections are one-way departures. It's honestly pretty baffling. Though, after thinking on it for a while, I have 2 theories as to why this happened. The innocent theory is merely that these jumps into the river made it too difficult to reverse the routes. But there are some holes in that theory. For starters, like I said, building around would have required some effort, but not more than building a whole nother route from Desert Hills to Koopa Troopa Beach, which, need I remind you, is one of the longest routes in the game. Additionally, there are other elements like this on other routes that they did build around. This jump from Starview Peak is a glider ramp when you're approaching from below, for example. Additionally, sometimes they're willing to build basically 2 completely different routes between the same 2 tracks, especially when rivers are involved. Great Question Mark Block Ruins to Faraway Oasis and Dandelion Depths to Cheap Cheap Falls both follow rivers with steep waterfalls, but they're not one-way routes because the reverse route is made possible via the roads. Either of those solutions could have been done here if Nintendo really wanted to. So, if you find those objections persuasive, here's another theory. One slightly more conspiratorial. Nintendo doesn't want you to play DK Spaceport. Hear me out. If there's one thing Nintendo seems to want to keep you from doing in this game, it's playing 3-lap tracks, particularly online. Now, DK Spaceport is not a 3-lap track. It's a segmented 1-lap track. But if you assume that Nintendo really prefers the 2 parts intermission to 1 part actual track ratio in online play, which is what they've achieved, more or less, well, segmented 1-lap tracks are a problem because they're the length of 3 laps around a track, just in a single lap. If you're Nintendo, that throws off your ratio completely. Now the actual track might take up a majority of the playtime, heaven forbid. But not to worry, we're Nintendo and we've got solutions for that. There are 4 segmented 1-lap tracks in the game, and to avoid making what we're doing too obvious, we'll come up with a different way to blunt each and every one of them. Let's start with Rainbow Road. This one's simple. We'll give it literally 1 connection so it almost never shows up in online play. Ideally, at this point in the video, the B-roll would be footage of me playing Rainbow Road online, because that's what I'm talking about, but I've literally never played it online before, so I don't have that footage. That is how effective they have been at ensuring this one doesn't come up. Alright, mission accomplished there. Now for Mario Circuit, since we remade 3 different tracks and stuck them together for this one, we'll simply make it so each route to it only plays one of the 3 tracks. I guess we'll still have to have one route that lets you play all 3 for Grand Prix mode, but that'll only be one of 8 routes to the track, so no big deal. Now for Peach Beach, let's make it so every route to it doesn't actually include the lap of the original Peach Beach. Now you might be thinking that if we were really committed to this, we'd make it so it only plays the lap of original Peach Beach, but I mean, we spent a lot of time and effort working on that new content, so people should play that at least, right? And yeah, making it so you don't play the original Peach Beach only saves like 30 to 45 seconds. But I mean, come on, this is about the principle of the matter. And finally, we get to DK Spaceport. It's not divorced from the rest of the game world like Rainbow Road, so we do actually need to have connections to it. And given the way it's laid out, there's really no justifiable way to race on only a portion of the track. So here's what we'll do. We'll make it so half the connections to it are one-way departures. This way it'll be half as likely to show up as it otherwise should be. And so there we go, using 4 different methods, I'd say we have accomplished our mission quite well. And to make things even better, no one's even noticed it or called it out. Now, can I be certain this is what happened? No, I mean, obviously I was not in any of the meetings where these decisions were made. And something tells me if this was the thought process behind the game design, Nintendo is not going to admit that anytime soon. But looking at how Nintendo treated all of these one-lap segmented tracks, in conjunction with how they've managed the online lobbies, I mean, it's like they say, once is happenstance, twice is coincidence, and the 3rd time is a pattern, and when it happens 4 times and at a 100% rate, maybe it's not too crazy to start assuming conspiracy. So yeah, that is all 10 one-way intermission routes explained. We have a couple concessions to Grand Prix mode, a track with an entrance that they never bothered to treat for racing, a few tracks out in the boonies that just needed to connect somewhere, even if the connection was boring and didn't make much sense, and to top it off, a conspiracy to stop you from playing segmented one-lap tracks in general, and DK Spaceport specifically. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, do subscribe, because this wasn't even supposed to be the main event. This was a little side quest I noticed while I was doing research for another Mario Kart World video, which should hopefully be out in the next couple weeks. And if you're too impatient to wait for that, we have got a few other Mario Kart World videos on the channel, as well as a few other Switch and Switch 2 things in general. So check those out if that sounds interesting. I'd also like to thank my patrons for the support who got, in exchange, early access to this video. I'd especially like to thank my $15 tier patrons, Alex Octling and Ashford Says. But anyways, until next time, I've been Seacraft, and I'll catch you in the next video. Goodbye.